Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we have a really special guest on with Kaila Yates. Now, Kaila, you are an interim CMO, and you've done that work for the past 10 years. You're in technology and financial services. You actually host a financial services podcast. But in your spare time, you also help operate in a nonprofit, a local community organization, which is very different from what you do in the world of business to business. But what we're going to be talking about today is really the missed opportunity for today's fractional CMOs and how that role is changing dramatically, especially with influence of post, COVID, AI, and just expectations in general. So we're going to get into that in a big way, but I'd love to just give you an opportunity to maybe give us a little bit more insight to who you are and your background first.
Yeah, of course. I don't want to say how many years because that would give away too much, but I've been a technology marketer for a very, very long time. And part of that is actually also working across the entire spectrum of technology, including financial services. So how that tech is applied and how consumers interact with the technology that we produce. And I love that I love the innovation, the creativity, but also just how local it can get. It can get very, very hyper local, which is really interesting. I've lived and worked across the world, and that international mindset really drives everything I do.
Well, here's what I'd love to do. I'd love to tap into those insights and just ask you questions to begin with. How is the role of the fractional CMO changing today? How is that evolving? And what do we need to know?
Gosh, if you got 2 hours, because we could go talk about this more. If you'd asked me this question a year ago, I might have said it's a problem. It's a problematic space, actually, as a fractional, because you are only able to work at a client for a day, maybe half a day, depending on the scope, depending on the business. But actually, as technology has increased, and specifically AI, I think there's so much more opportunity now for fractional roles. And let me explain. In the past, what you would have to do is really spend time with that client, understanding their market, understanding their priorities, understanding where they are in their growth cycle, and their strategy, really kind of getting under the skin of what were their strategic goals, how are they investing, what does their investment cycle look like? So loads and lots of questions in your 1 hour in an organization. And you'd have to know the ICP, you'd have to know the media and the channels that are the most appropriate for that business, and replicate that across the world, depending on whether it's a global business or national. And yet, 18 months hasn't rolled by, and AI is really giving us that information at the tip of our fingers and the right prompts. Of course, nothing gets done without actually having that human oversight and that intelligence and the insight. But I think the right answer to your question is it's complicated but really exciting.
And AI, it's the topic du jour in every industry, every conversation, right? So yes, it brings an entire world to us that we haven't had before, data, insights, conclusions that we can make. One of the things that we were talking about right before we came on here was that lots of times, typically, as you come in as a B2B CMO, it's because of a failure of the previous role. And tell me a little bit about how do you go about learning from that? Because AI bringing in learning, but learning from the failure of a predecessor is probably equally as important, right? And very hyper-personalized for that company, that role.
You're absolutely right. And in fact, this is where the fractional CMO really comes into their own. A technology can do only so much, right? And I should just reframe what you asked, because it's not always the failure of the previous CMO. It could just be the failure of a strategy, a failure of investment, and a failure of prioritizing marketing. So often it's, the scenario is I'm asked to come and work with an organization because marketing isn't working, whatever that means. And so I very quickly have to try and understand what is it that's not working. Is it the individual? Is it the strategy? Is it the product? And so that's really the premise of the scope of work that you set into. But failure is as much the organization on the organization that you're working with as the individual. And so sometimes they're just not supported. They don't have the stakeholder insights. They don't have the engagement internally. They're often not um, respected is the wrong word, but really they're not seen as a strategic partner. And so marketing becomes that at the end of the value chain, the order taker rather than the colleague, the co-stakeholder within an organization. So I really have to unravel very quickly, are the problems organizational? Are the problems within the marketing organization as well? Our ability to execute? And is it sometimes a product market fit? So there's a lot of questions, and no technology can solve that for you. That's really about asking the right questions, challenging the input that you're given, and making massive assumptions, but then testing those assumptions.
So it's very interesting how you're positioning this because you're right, as a fractional CMO, you're there part time. And if the role that was there before was full time, yet in some way, shape, or form failed,
Yep.
right? And now you have less time to solve these same problems, and you're carrying probably a lot of the same, preconceived notions about marketing's role to have a seat at the table, right? Marketing's role to be a equal contributor. As CMO, you are a executive, C-suite executive in the company. So that means on your shoulders is also long-term planning and strategic sustainable growth of the business outside of just your departmental focus on marketing. So it's stacked against you. You don't have as much time. You're already behind in terms of perceptions of your role and what you're doing, and you're having to unravel all of this. So on one end, it kind of feels like, oh, shoot, like let's start a new career path, right? On the other side, you're fresh eyes, you're fresh
Mhm.
perspective, right? What I want to know is, how do you come in and how do you gain that respect of the organization? How do you gain the respect of the peers when you have a limited amount of time to do it, and knowing you're kind of coming in with old perceptions that are already being attached to you?
It's a really tough one actually to answer because I don't think I have a clear answer for that. I think a lot of it is how quickly you can understand how commercial that organization, your commercial thinking, and how quickly you can apply that, and the questions that you ask. Really, to me, it's the questions you ask and your ability to um, challenge that internal perception of marketing. Because more often than not, the perception is that this marketing function is not commercial. And by commercial, it is how can marketing um, prove that it demand creation activities are generating demand? You
Yeah.
know, what is a lead? What's the quality of that lead? Where is it coming from? And how does marketing go about attribution is also, it's almost become a dirty word in marketing, but certainly being able to show where that connection was created, where how did we meet this contact,
Yeah.
and then what's their journey been with us? So some of it is quite simply the questions you ask, that how quickly you can understand and consume the internal data. So that's your strategy decks. It's the last financial reports, EBITDA. Really being able to understand how the business runs, and then what if it's a technology business or a services business, how those two are delivered.
Mhm.
Um, and and then I kind of look at a product market fit is probably a bit too technical, but it's really what's the proposition, and is that proposition being met? And then I go away and I kind of do the external validation, which is go talk to customers, go talk to prospects. Um, and through that entire period, I'm very open with my communication. I'm constantly feeding back what I'm learning, the assumptions I'm making as a result of that learning, and allowing those stakeholders to challenge me. And sometimes it's, I think you have a problem with your product.
Yep.
I think you have a problem with your customer service. I think we have a problem with our user journey. And here's why I think that. And these are the reasons why I'm saying it. And so i- to have a seat at the table means being able to challenge the other people at the table in order for you to all achieve that one result. Right? So we're all in this together. I'm not there to fight with anybody or make them look bad. It's a collaboration.
So here's what I absolutely love. I was just tickled pink to hear this because I talk a lot to CMOs, not even fractional CMOs, and they worry about getting that seat at the table. They have imposter syndrome. And one of the things that you said there is obviously you have to understand their commercial operations, their market, right, their products, but that's fairly easy to do, right? That's basic, that's table stakes.
Yep.
What gives you the ability to interject and challenge and come up with ideas and recommendations that put you at that table, in my mind, is what you said, which is you're going to go out and you're going to talk to customers.
Mhm.
Customers are the highest voice of authority in any business. And businesses in general really don't do a good job of listening to or talking with their customers.
Yep. Yeah. And what we do is often, and again, this isn't, a criticism of every salesperson I've ever worked with, but we rely on the sales force to
Yes.
give us insight, right? And while that's very valid, it's flawed because they've gone down a path with that customer. They've explained the IC, they've gone through the ICP. Whereas I really want to go, and the questions I'm going to ask from them is, I think, going to be very different to what sales asks.
Yes. Yes.
And likewise, very different to what the product team might ask. So I think it's beholden on us marketers to understand that, and I've moved from tech to financial services, but the insight gathering that a marketer does, that the questions we ask our
Yeah.
audience don't differ. That's not different. It's quite
Right.
simply what is different is how that product is then applied in that particular customer site. Whether it's a trading platform, a banking app, or a payroll system, doesn't really matter, because what you're asking is, why are you looking to buy? Why are you looking for new technologies? What problems are you trying to solve?
Right.
And how would you have gone about those given the market that you're looking at? So, it's differentiation, it's insight gathering, it's understanding the competitive landscape, and it's really interesting to just listen to the problems that a customer is trying to solve.
You know, the typical playbook when a new CMO comes in is that they'll call up 15, 20 customers and have direct conversations that are unencumbered by a sales conversation, right? Gong did a study themselves. They're the number one in sales call recording, right? And they looked at over 4,000 sales conversations. You know what they found?
Mm,
The rep talks 2/3 to 3/4 of the time,
exactly.
right? And it's a sales conversation. It's you being sold to you. There's a shield that is up between you. There's only so much I'm going to open up and talk genuinely and honestly when I'm talking to a salesperson. You would never devise the best insight learning program to run through a sales organization. That's just not their charter. It's not what it's all about. Customer success, same thing. They're putting out fires, they're answering questions, they're trying to cross-sell and upsell. Those are three charters that aren't about learning, right? So what happens is what you're saying here is that we rely on broken systems to understand our customer base. And if we can understand our customer base better than our competitors, that's how we win. And so as a fractional CMO, your seat at the table is how do you genuinely truly understand that, right? And then make recommendations as a result.
It absolutely is. And one of the, maybe because I grew up in technology, you know, as a technology marketer, but I'm not just fascinated by it. I really believe that this is the direct thing that all marketing should be looking at is what's the experience that we're delivering? Because so much is now is online, you know, so much of it is a digital platform. So, but how is that prospect? Let's say prospect. I won't look at users at the moment. Let's just say the prospect. How are they interacting with us in real life as well as online? And is
Right.
that experience mirrored in the way that we want to be perceived, or we believe we're being perceived, you know? And
Right.
that I think the questions I really enjoy is that how does the buyer perceive us? Because we think as brand, you know, owners and brand evangelists, we think that you know, we're positioning our brand in a certain way and we have a tone of voice and, you know, it's very rarely understood by
Yeah.
that prospect. And I love that bit. I think that's where the real insights come in.
You know, one of the things you said there, it's interesting because they, the idea of creating genuine learning isn't a one-time thing. It isn't a project, right? Our ICPs are diverse, complex, and always changing, right? And the moment that we think we understand it and we get it is the moment that we're going to look back 3 to 4 months from now and we don't understand how it's changing, right? So how do you, if this is one of the big keys to success, how do you incorporate that into your philosophy of being an interim, a fractional, you know, CMO?
Constant learning. Curiosity is, you know, I just think it's a marketer's super skill. You really do have to constantly get yourself out there and one, talk, listen, read, just get on a webinar, get on, you know, it doesn't have to be competitors, it can be anybody in the market, but really look at what are the questions that they're asking. You know, webinars are a secret tool too. What are the questions people are asking? How is that ICP responding to that information? Where are they finding it? So it's, for me, it's curiosity. It's that constantly learning and testing. So I think as marketers, we have this wonderful opportunity to, I don't mean just A/B test, but I mean, we can do little pilots to validate an idea. And those pilots can be extremely successful. And here comes what one of the things we talked about. They can also create some, you know, failures. And
Right.
and being comfortable with failure, I think, is something that the C-suite is find really hard to talk about. You know, we should what business plan says we're going to plan to fail at least 3 times? You know, they won't, but it's central to what marketing does because, you know, are we always going to hit the message right for every channel and every opportunity? Probably not.
Mm.
So how do you prepare the C-suite for that? I don't mean failure, but we won't get it right every time.
No, the best Major League Baseball players in America bat around the 400s, which means they strike out. They don't get on plate,
Yeah.
on base 6 out of 10 times, right? So nobody's going to be like that. But I wrote it down, and I love the line. I'm going to quote you on it. I guarantee you. Curiosity is a marketer's super skill. And if we're not curious, who else in the organization is responsible for understanding, articulating the insights from the customer? The B2C organizations typically can have a chief customer officer or a chief experience officer. That isn't a typical role in a B2B company. So
No, I'm
who's,
gonna fight for it. Stephen,
yeah,
fight for it. So if you
but
think of,
it's a fight to take on, right? Because the head of sales isn't going to take that on.
yep,
CRO, customer success isn't, the CEO isn't, right? Operations isn't. Like, it is there for ours, the mantle to take. And we should be the most curious,
we
right?
should, and I think being a brand owner is the wrong word. I don't know if we're the owner, but we certainly the brand driver. That gives us permission to
Yes.
take the
Yes.
experience role.
Yes.
And that I think is really critical. And I think the other thing is, it's one of those, it's not a secret, but we all know it, is that marketing is often the glue. It's the glue between the organization.
Yes.
So our closest partners are sales, product, operations, service, customer success. So we're the glue. And actually, that gives us even more permission, excuse me, on the table, at the table, in the conversation, to be able to challenge and say, customer success is showing NPS scores of, I don't know, 50. But actually, why are we using NPS? Why aren't we using customer success? Surveys. Why aren't we talking to our customers more frequently? And when we do, we shouldn't be embarrassed to show that actually we've taken a drop in our customer sat results, but we should be saying, here's what you told us, here's what we're doing. That's an incredibly powerful brand story.
It is. Our customers want to know that we're listening. And so, how are we reflecting that? We should be listening, but how are we reflecting that not only within the organization, like you said, the glue to every different department, but how are we reflecting that actually back to the customers themselves, right?
Yep.
Everybody wants to be heard. The last thing we want to do, you've been in tech for a long time, right, is for them to hear that we've heard, but we're not doing anything about it. That's not
Exactly.
empathetic. That's not building trust, right?
No.
But it doesn't mean that we have to do everything they suggest either, right? But if they know that we're actively, genuinely, honestly listening, they are going to bequeath to us that more trust than we've had. And trust is one of these things that you look at the Edelman, trust mark index and just going down. There's surveys that have been done that 74% of B2B buyers don't actually believe the customer evidence we supply to them. Part of building trust is being in a dialogue with them, collaborating with them, right? And then collaborating internally and being that glue. That's so important. Again, who's taking the mantle of being the glue between the different departments?
And this is where, I said I have I feel sort of I have a conflicting view about fractional roles, because how can you do all of that, Steve, in one day a week, if that, maybe half a day a week? How can you be,
It's very tough.
across all of the different touch points and um priorities and the culture of the organization, and motivation of the employees and the motivation of the I really struggle with that. I think that that's a massive ask for one person to do in half a day. Um, and also for me, I feel like I really have to get under the skin of an organization so that I can modify my approach to the way that we would go to market. Modify in terms of, there are some organizations that are massive risk takers and are excited by creativity and innovation, and others that are a bit more conservative. So how do we push both to do one to become a little bit more risk averse and another to become a little bit more ready to take that big leap. And I think as in fractional CMO, you're really there to often solve a specific problem. You're there as a retainer to help the exec sometimes in answering their sort of big marketing questions, or often it's communications. How do we talk to PR um, and so you really do have to. I think you invest a lot more in an organization than you might get in terms of remuneration.
It's a big question, right? Because most CMOs in a full-time role don't feel like they have enough time to do it. I've
Yeah.
never talked to a CMO that said, I have more time than I need for myself and my team, and I'm looking for things for them to do. Nobody says that, right? So I think what it's all about, we had a woman, 3-time B2B CMO, Goldman Sachs advisor. It's just about prioritizing. You mentioned earlier that, we're kind of given just a bunch of tasks. We can literally, the marketing tactics can rule us, right? But if you say the number one job and you set the expectations, whether you're interim, full-time, fractional, that one of the biggest challenges faced by the organization in this role is constant dialogue with our customers. So that's going to be a significant portion of what we need to do. And I'm happy to lead that charge. Like, we don't do as good a job at setting expectations, typically, especially in a fractional role. We tend to be able to say very well, oh, you need a brand strategy. We can do that, right? You need a launch plan. We can help you do that, right? We can do. What we don't always do is say, this is what we should be doing.
And you said that perfectly, because that kind of the challenges of being a fractional is the stop clock is on the minute you check in, right? The minute your Monday morning start, or your Tuesday, whatever day of the week you choose. And you're there to solve a problem, right? So you often get into the problem solving,
Yes.
which can be a team, it can be your team, it could be your the approach to content or go to market or whatever it might be. So part of you is there to solve that problem immediately. So you've got the immediate goal and you've got short-term goal, long-term goals. And so I often kind of talk about that very openly to say, look, if you want me to solve this problem, I'm going to need 3 days, or I'm going to need 2 days. But actually, that's holding me up from doing the bigger picture stuff. Which one do you want me to start with? And as a fractional, sometimes you've got a great team in place, and all you're doing is guiding and leading them, and making sure they have a sounding board that understands the language of marketing, and can direct them. But in that scenario, you have a bit more time to go and do the external, but actually your guidance becomes much more of a, how am I directing the team to do something wider than they may be used to. So what I mean by that is, if they don't have the leadership in-house, how can I lend that leadership while still doing the external, ICP validation? Even the ICP validation is key. It's really the listening, the insight gathering that then churns over the program. So I find that it's the role of fractional is incredibly complicated. Is it an advisor? I see them more as advisory roles. And being hands-on, if your scope of your fractional role is to be very hands-on, it becomes problematic very quickly, because you can't.
Well, so I think that prioritization is key, right? But one of the things that I want to ask you, because I wish we had 2 hours to keep exploring all of this, but if there was literally one thing that you wanted others to take away from listening or watching this podcast, what would that be?
Define success and build the metrics around that, because it doesn't matter what you do if you can't prove that you've had an impact. What's the impact?
Mm.
And I think I've learned that as much from working in the charitable sector as I have in B2B, is knowing what the impact of the work that you're doing is going to have on the organization, on the individuals in that organization, and sometimes in the relationship. We talked about these stakeholder relationships. And I'll say as much, I really want to leave this organization knowing that at the C-suite, that the marketing, product, sales, customer success processes or methodology or collaboration is improved. And I'll get that feedback from you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's I think it's defining success. There's so much more, but that's my first response.
Well, good. Well, Kaila, thank you so much. I know people are going to have questions. Would it be appropriate if we gave out a link to your LinkedIn profile so people could reach out to you?
Absolutely. I always love connecting with people. Yeah.
Well, good. Well, thank you for coming on. I kind of feel like we pulled the curtain back, right, on the fractional CMO role, but also the CMO role and its opportunity to impact the entire organization. So thank you for helping us peel the layer back on the onions, or do whatever it is, the analogy, right? But let's shed some light on this. And I think you did that today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve. It's a great conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you. And I think that, whenever I'm on a pod, and even whether it's my podcast or as a guest, it's always, as you say, it's peeling back the onions, but I feel like we've only just started. There's so
Yes.
much more to talk about.
Well, maybe we'll have to design a second podcast.
Lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for having me.